in the Telegraph as talking about the grooming scandal from 2012, right, near the end of his 5-year tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions at the CPS. He said, in a number of cases presented to us, particularly in cases involving groups, there's clearly an issue of ethnicity that has to be understood and addressed. As prosecutors, we shouldn't shy away from that, but if we're honest, it's the approach to the victims, the credibility issue that caused these cases not to be prosecuted in the past. There was a lack of understanding. Simon Danchuk, of course, who appears on this TV show quite regularly, who represented Oldham from 2010 to 2017, says he was threatened by Tony Lloyd, who at the time was campaigning to be Greater Manchester Police and Crime Commissioner. There's all sorts of problems with this story. There's all kinds of issues. Sir Keir Starmer admitted that the CPS had let vulnerable girls down during his watch after a case was dropped against a rape suspect in 2009. Now we've got Jess Phillips, who, of course, back in January of last year, said this. Oh, we'll bring you that in a second. She basically said that nothing was being done about grooming gangs and something needed to be done. She now says that she's not ready to recommend a proper investigation and a proper inquiry, and it's down to Oldham Council to see whether they want to do it themselves. Have a look at this.
Actual reality of what is happening in government currently is a sticking plaster, announceable thing like the grooming task force. We're a year on from the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. Years and years worth of evidence. And a year on, not a single one of the recommendations. The government have said they'll take some of them. There's no timeline for when any of those recommendations are going to happen, and that's both about prevention and supporting of victims who have been victims of sexual violence in childhood.
I think this story is going to be a big story for Keir Starmer when he returns from his holiday in Madeira. Let's talk now to Alain Tolhurst, Chief Reporter at Politics Home. Alan, very good morning to you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Mike.
Good to see you. This story is going to be a problem, I think, for Keir Starmer. I mean, it looks as though the mainstream newspapers have kind of got their teeth into it. There's all kinds of politicians, from Chris Philp to Nigel Farage to Kemi Badenoch, demanding that a proper inquiry is now held, some of them with slightly more reason to do so than others, I suppose. But it's a big issue for Keir Starmer, this, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think for a long time, the Tory party tried to kind of criticise Keir Starmer for his work before he entered politics when he was Director of Public Prosecutions. Yeah. And I think they were unable to really tie a lot of the stuff to him and his kind of work. Obviously, there was the kind of the stuff around Jimmy Savile that was pretty awful business. But the fact is that this clearly relates to a time towards the end of his tenure as DPP, when there was a massive failure, clearly, amongst kind of local prosecutors and then perhaps as wider prosecutors to actually tackle these gangs. Yeah. And so I think we're going to continue to kind of hear quite a lot about this, because clearly, as you know, Jess Phillips herself pointed out there earlier this year, there was a 7-year inquiry by Alexis Jay from 2015 to 2022 into an independent child sexual abuse inquiry, and a lot of those recommendations that came out in 2022 were not enacted by the previous government, and there is still going to be continued calls to make sure those things are enacted so that things don't happen again. And until they are, and until the government kind of moves forward with this stuff, there's going to continue to be questions about what was done and what wasn't done back when Keir Starmer was at the CPS.
Yeah, because up until now, I remember there was an exchange between Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer about Jimmy Savile, which everybody was kind of all over the place about. Nobody thought it was right. Some people thought it was good, you know, but it kind of came and went. Whereas this is Keir Starmer actually admitting previously that there was a problem. So once he's admitted there's a problem, then why on earth would they then be able to say we don't need an inquiry into what happened at Oldham, when clearly he's not happy with what happened at Oldham?
Yeah, it is interesting. And clearly, obviously, other local councils, Telford, Rotherham, and actually in Greater Manchester itself, have conducted their own inquiries since that 2022 inquiry finished. And so I think the government, I guess, is saying that it's consistent that it's for local councils to do so. We know that the previous Conservative administration, Amanda Soloway, when she was the Tory safeguarding minister, the position that Jess Phillips is now in, rejected a similar call from Oldham Council to launch an inquiry led by government. So it's clearly kind of a consistency issue. issue. But I think, as you say, there is going to continue to be pressure on this, essentially, to push through this. These things go back a long way, and it doesn't feel, a lot of people don't feel that we've moved on from it successfully.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it's still going on now. I mean, there are still cases being prosecuted even as we speak.
Yeah.
And so, you know, somebody was saying to me earlier today, that might be used by Starmer and Labour as a kind of a means of sidestepping it and say, oh, no, but there are still, you know, live cases, we can't talk about it. But there's no reason why there can't be a proper investigation. And I think Jess Phillips is going to have a problem here as well. And also, just to make matters even more interesting, Elon Musk has decided to put both of his feet straight into the whole thing. What are you making of that?
Yeah, well, I think the problem for, you know, I think for, obviously, if you look at the kind of public support for Elon Musk, it's quite low amongst the the broader population. It's even amongst reform voters, it's not that high. And I think when you see him overtly supporting Tommy Robinson, a person who has, you know, a lot of people are repulsed by in this country, I think that means that it's less likely to get kind of wider play. I think that clearly Elon Musk is going to be very popular with a small proportion of people, mainly kind of reform voters. I don't think necessarily, you know, he's going to be able to galvanise wider support.
Yeah.
Because I do think
I'm not sure it's about support, though, Alan. I think it's more about just the high-profile nature of what he's doing, you know, because he's basically keeping the story bubbling along. Because what I think most people in Labour would probably like for it to do is to just disappear and for there to be a new, you know, horizon coming next week when, you know, there's a new year, they can talk about change. But as long as Elon Musk is continuing to put out millions and millions and millions of tweets, and which are viewed by hundreds of millions of people, you know, that's going to continue to pressurise the government, it seems to me. And I think you're right about the Tommy Robinson thing, you know, because that creates a problem for Nigel Farage, who's as leader of Reform, has always distanced himself from Tommy Robinson. So I think that, you know, Nigel will be trying to have conversations with Elon Musk and possibly Donald Trump to say, well, you know, would you mind, like, leaving that bit alone and going after the Prime Minister without actually mentioning Tommy Robinson?
Yeah, I think you're probably right, and I think it's kind of interesting for people like us in the media is how you kind of cover Elon Musk, because, you know, as you say, he tweets stuff out from Twitter. Most people in this country are not on Twitter, essentially. You know, most people don't look at them. Fewer and fewer people are on Twitter now. But he is also a key ally of the person who's about to become the president of the United States, and so therefore, it's how much do you say when you know, we had this long conversations during the last kind of Trump presidency about, do you lead your news bulletins on a tweet from Donald Trump? Like, are there more important things than what, like, someone has just said on Twitter, essentially? And I think we're going to continue to have those conversations, you know, as Elon Musk, if he's tweeting more and more on this kind of subject, how much do you kind of lead with that, and how much do you say it's kind of not that important, it's just him using kind of bully pulpit from across the pond, you know, shouting about UK politics that he doesn't have a huge amount of knowledge about? And I think that's going to be a definite kind of you know, situation for us to try and work out.
I think you've just very well, in a nutshell, put the problem to the BBC as to how they approach things in this country. That's why the media in this country is so screwed up, because they look at personalities instead of news. News is news, right? I come from an old-fashioned background. News is basically something that somebody doesn't want you to know about. At the end of the day, that's news. You know, news is not, you know, let's do a nice little puff piece on some social care policy that Labour are kind of going to touch up. You know, let's not try and identify what Keir Starmer's talking about in his Christmas message. You know, I watched some of the news shows over the course of the last week, and quite frankly, they were useless, completely utterly useless, not covering proper stories. You know, people in this country do care about what Donald Trump says. They do care about what Elon Musk says, because these are people who have an influence on the world. What they don't care about is what Kay Burley thinks.
well, yeah, I would take that up with Kay Burley. I wouldn't want to get into between a row between you two.
But you see what I mean, though? I mean, it's not about whether people who run the news business in Britain think Elon Musk is a newsworthy individual. You know, there's still hundreds of millions of people that use Twitter every day. The fact that he's sitting next to the President of the United States of America makes him newsworthy.
Yeah, but when it comes to British politics, he doesn't have any. I mean, he might have some influence from outside of it, but he's not involved in it. He's not involved in any of these decisions. He's not involved in. There's always talk about him donating money. As far as I'm aware, he hasn't even donated any of this kind of promised money to reform, that kind of stuff. He is an outside kind of actor. He's kind of shouting from the sidelines. And how much is it?
Well, he's inside the White House, though, Alan. I mean, he's not really from the sidelines. He's inside the White House. That's where he's going to be shouting from. Therefore, that's important.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, I think one of the key stories of 2025 is going to be that relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. I think I'm not sure how close he might end up being. I think that Donald Trump's probably going to grow tiresome of Elon Musk's influence, I would imagine, as this year goes on. It'd be interesting to see how their relationship kind of develops, I think.
Let's look at what Labour are now not doing as well. Social care overhaul delayed for 3 more years. Front of the Times today. More business that they're supposed to be doing, which they're now not doing.
Yeah, and it's a very depressing story, I think, for a number of reasons. You know, the fact is that no one's going to grasp the nettle on social care for a long time. Multiple successive governments have failed to tackle it. It's a very difficult one to try and sort out. It's very expensive, it's very messy, and it's going to be, you know, people are going to be upset. Wherever you kind of set the floor or the ceiling on how much people have to spend on care in later life and social care, it's always going to be massively controversial. You know, Andrew Dilnot was commissioned a long time ago to do this kind of report into it. Those reforms have sat in a drawer for a long time, not being enacted by successive prime ministers. And again, Labour came in saying they were going to have this plan for national kind of social care plan, and it looks like that's going to be pushed back further. The fact is, this new commission they've announced today, you know, by Baroness Casey, who's very well respected, but that commission is not going to report back its final recommendations until the end of 2027, the beginning of 2028, which effectively means that no changes, no kind of announcements from this are going to be enacted in this Parliament. It's effectively, the announcement today is Labour saying they're going to push this back to a second term, that they don't want to tackle this issue, you know, in the first term. And, you know, we talked earlier about inquiries and, you know, how useful they are, and commission. I think often with these kind of commissions and stuff, it really is about not actually tackling the issue, but just pushing it further into the future and saying, so whenever any difficult questions come, you say, oh, well, we put it out to a royal commission, we want a cross-party agreement on this, we'll wait until the results of this commission before we implement it. Meanwhile, social care, it continues to be in crisis. Anyone who's had any you know, relationship with it in the last few years knows that it's in crisis. Huge amounts of vacancies, a complete lack of spending, and, you know, it affects the whole system, because if you can't effectively have good, effective social care, then you have beds blocked in hospitals, you have people unable to come in through A&E, all those kind of problems as well, in community care as well. And so, yeah, it's
well, it tells you where their priorities lie, doesn't it? Which is basically not with helping people, it's just with, you know, pushing their own particular agenda. Alan, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Alan